The humans had declared war on the deadliest animal on their planet, and Vethael's first thought, cataloging the casualty reports, was that they were losing. The data came through the observation deck's primary display in columns. Dengue incidents, malaria resurgence, projected mortality curves for the next 18 months. Vethael had been a xenobiologist for 11 cycles. It had cataloged species in the middle of tectonic collapse, in the aftermath of self-inflicted atmospheric poisoning, in the slow terminal arithmetic of civilizations that had simply run out of options. It knew what failure looked like in a dataset. The columns had that shape. The curves bent upward in the particular way that Menace system had found its ceiling and was pressing against it from below. The creature responsible had a wingspan of 3 millimeters. Vethael pulled the taxonomic file for the 1100th time and still could not reconcile the arithmetic. Aedes aegypti. Mass, approximately 2.5 milligrams. Lifespan, 2 weeks to a month. Individual lethality, effectively 0, absent a pathogen load. And yet the mortality column attached to this organism stretched back further than the Union's recorded contact with Earth, further than the human's own written history. A number so large it had required 3 significant figure revisions as the Union's historical models improved. The best current estimate was that this insect had killed more humans than every war the species had ever waged against itself combined. More than famine, more than the slow geological violence of their own planet's tectonic activity, more than anything else on a world that had spent 4 billion years optimizing for lethality. Below, through the observation deck's lower viewport, the West African corridor was green and brown and laced with the silver threads of rivers. From its altitude, it looked peaceful. Vethael's biochemical sensing membranes, 7 of them, arranged in a lateral line along its thorax, registered nothing at this distance except the recycled air of the ship, which carried the faint mineral cold of the filtration system, and, from somewhere in the crew quarters, the persistent chemical signature of Commander Rethon's displeasure. That signature had been intensifying for 6 days. Since the new resistance data came in, preliminary quarantine documentation, Rethon said, from the doorway behind Vethael. He had not announced himself. Savari senior officers rarely did, a dominance behavior so deeply encoded that Phil doubted Rethon was aware of it. I want to file by end of this observation cycle. The campaign is still active, Vethael said. The campaign is failing. Rethael moved to the display. His dorsal membrane, the translucent fan of skin that ran from the base of his skull to the midpoint of his spine, had been rigid and pale since the morning briefing. Maximum Savari stress posture. Vethael noted peripherally that its own membrane was relaxed. It was not sure what to make of that. For continents, 18 months. The resistant strain has outpaced every model they built to contain it. The humans do not have the genomic tools to respond in time. Their timeline may not match our projection models. Rethon looked at Vethael with the particular quality of attention that meant the comment had registered as either interesting or insubordinate, and he had not yet decided which. File the preliminary documentation, he said. We observe 72 more hours. Then, the report goes to the Union Council. He left. His displeasure scent lingered. Vethael turned back to the viewport and pulled up the drone feed. The feed had been running for 6 hours. Most of it was agricultural land, irrigation channels, the geometric spread of a mobile field laboratory that had been moving along the corridor's northern edge for the past 3 weeks. The lab was a converted cargo hauler, old, visibly repaired in at least 4 distinct locations using materials that did not match the original hull plating. The humans who operated it had been on Vethael's observation log for 9 days. Dr. Amara Okafor led epidemiologist, Vector Control Division, Earth Coordinated Eradication Campaign, 3rd Wave. The file was thorough. Degrees from 3 institutions. Field deployments on 4 continents. A publication record that covered dengue, malaria, chikungunya, Zika, every pathogen this particular insect had learned to carry across the centuries of their war. The biographical data described her as 51 years old, which placed her at roughly the midpoint of a human lifespan. The photograph showed a woman with close-cropped gray hair. A particular quality of expression that Vithael had learned through observation was the human facial configuration, for I have heard this argument before, and I remain unpersuaded. The drone feed showed her walking into an active infestation site. No full-body protective equipment. A long-sleeve garment, treated fabric. Vithael could see from the drone's spectrographic data that it was impregnated with insecticide, but the treatment was several weeks old, and the left sleeve showed a tear near the elbow that had been mended with what appeared to be adhesive tape. Behind her, the younger human, corpsman Davi Ferreira, field assistant, 28 years old, distressingly cheerful in all recorded footage, was carrying a sample container and saying something that made Okafor laugh. She was laughing. The infestation density in that corridor was, by Vithael's measurement, approximately 400 breeding-capable females per cubic meter of air, each one carrying a resistance profile that had broken the last 3 pesticide formulations Earth's chemists had deployed against it, each one capable of transmitting a pathogen that had claimed more human lives than any event in recorded history. Okafor walked through the cloud of them like she was walking through rain. She stopped, extended her left arm, the one with the taped sleeve, watched. A mosquito landed on her forearm, below the tape, where the skin was exposed. She let it feed. Vithael's dorsal membrane went rigid before it had consciously registered what it was watching. The mosquito fed. Okafor watched it. When it lifted off, she raised her arm, looked at the small red mark, and then looked at the smear of it on her palm where she had, not swatted it, not in panic, with deliberation, pressed her thumb to the bite. She said something to Ferreira. He checked the device. Nodded. She still hadn't wiped the blood off her palm. Vithael stared at the smear for a long time. The drone feed continued. Okafor moved deeper into the infestation corridor, and the smear on her palm caught the late afternoon light, and Vithael filed the image under the category it used when its standard classifications had run out of room. The category had no formal name. It was the folder where Vithael put things it needed to return to. The drone footage would later make clear that what Okafor said to Ferreira was still Type 3. Good, we're in the right place. She had used the bite mark to confirm the strain variant. She had used her own arm as a field test. Vithael sat with that for a while, in the recycled cold of the observation deck, with Rethon's preliminary quarantine documentation open in a secondary window, and the mortality curve still bent in the shape of something running out of time. Then it opened a new request form and filed for surface descent clearance. Rethon approved it with a notation that read, in Savari administrative shorthand, something that translated approximately as observed, logged, consequences yours. Vithael took that as a yes. The field lab smelled of ethanol, something Vithael's biochemical senses identified as capsaicin derivatives, and a third compound for which the Savari had no classification except controlled decay. Organic material in a deliberate state of arrested decomposition, not rotting but not fully preserved, held at the precise threshold between the two in a way that suggested intent rather than accident. It took Vithael 4 steps inside the lab to locate the source of the third smell. A row of sample containers along the eastern wall, each one sealed, each one labeled in a small, precise hand. The labels were in 2 languages, a phonetic West African script and standard, and the standard labels read in sequence. Our strain isolate 7, our strain isolate 8, our strain isolate 9, our strain isolate. You're taller than I expected, Ferreira said from directly behind Vithael's left shoulder. Vithael turned. Ferreira was holding a metal cup toward it. The cup contained something hot. Vithael's thermal sensing put it at approximately 73 degrees Celsius, and dark brown and aromatic in a way that layered complex chemical signals on top of each other in a pattern its sensors were still parsing. I'm fine, Vithael said. It's tea, Ferreira said. It's not going to hurt you. He paused. Probably. I don't require. We also have coffee. And there's rice on the burner, and I made pepper soup this morning, and if you're not going to eat anything, I'm going to feel terrible about it, so... He tilted the cup slightly, an offering posture. Vithael had cataloged this gesture across 17 species. Most of them used it to establish non-aggression. A few used it as a dominance test. Ferreira appeared to be using it because he genuinely wanted Vethael to have some tea. I will accept the tea, Vethael said. It did not drink the tea. It held the cup. The warmth was not unpleasant against the surfaces of its forelimbs. Okafor appeared from behind a partition at the back of the lab, pulling her other sleeve down. She had changed the tape on the left one. Fresh tape, same color, applied with the same diagonal angle as the previous piece, a small repetitive precision that suggested habit. She looked at Vethael with the expression from the biographical photograph. Then, she looked at the cup and its forelimbs. He got you, she said. The offering behavior was persistent. It always is. She pulled out a chair, turned it backward, sat with her forearms crossed on the back of it. The posture made her look shorter than she was. More compact, like something coiled. You want to see the campaign data? I have access to the campaign data. You want to see it from here? She wasn't asking. She reached past Vethael, moving without any apparent concern about proximity to a six-limbed alien of uncertain temperament, without slowing, without checking Vethael's reaction, and pulled a tablet from the table behind it, pulled up a map, spread it across the table between them. Vethael had seen this map from orbit. The red zones, the spread. The resistant strains advance through the corridor, the continent, the hemisphere, the planet, like watching a tide come in. Up close, the red was different. Not total. Fractured. The eastern provinces were almost solid. Yes, and the northern advance was faster than the models had projected, and the curves were shaped the way curves were shaped when systems were approaching failure thresholds. But between the red there were gaps. Patches. A color that on Vethael's display had registered as background noise, and, from this distance, red as pale gold. Where the gold zones? Vethael said. Okafor looked up. Something shifted in her expression. Not pride. Vethael had cataloged pride across many species and knew its shape. This was different. More internal. Those are ours, she said. She said the way Ferreira poured tea, like it was the most ordinary thing. Behind her, the mortality curves on the secondary display bent upward. 600,000 projected additional deaths in the next 18 months if the resistant strain continued its current expansion. Vethael's sensors were reading the air between them and picking up Okafor's biochemical signature. Human stress hormones were within its detection range, and the woman had levels that registered as currently processing significant threat. But she was sitting with her arms on a chair back talking about gold zones on a map like she was describing a garden. Vethael had been in the field long enough to recognize when a species was dissociating from catastrophe. It had cataloged that too. It had a folder for it. The folder was large, and its contents were not historically predictive of good outcomes. This did not feel like dissociation. Night came the way it did in this region. Fast, thorough, the sky going from orange to purple to black in less time than a Savari day cycle's first transition. Fajita kolke. The pepper soup smell intensified to a level that registered on Vethael's sensors as a mild irritant. The capsaicin concentration in the air was measurably higher than outside, and Ferreira ate a bowl of it and then had a second bowl, and Vethael cataloged this under the Humans Consume Neurotoxins for Pleasure heading and moved on. Okafor sat at her workstation with a lamp on. Not the overhead lights. A small personal lamp, set to a warm orange spectrum that Vethael's visual system processed as dim, but which was apparently adequate for human eyes. The lamp attracted mosquitoes. They gathered around it in a loose orbit, the way small flying things gathered around heat sources on most warm atmosphere worlds, and one by one they drifted toward Okafor's exposed forearms. She did not move. She was counting them. Vethael could see her lips moving. She had a tally counter in her right hand, a small manual device, purely mechanical, that clicked each time her thumb pressed it. She sat in the lamplight and let the mosquitoes land and counted them and made notes in a small book and did not swat them. She had 12 bites on her left arm by the time Vethael had been watching for an hour. She hadn't noticed Vethael watching, or she had noticed and did not consider it relevant. Vethael wasn't sure which interpretation was more unsettling. Then Okafor looked up, not at Vethael, at the shelf behind her, and something in her posture changed. A settling, a specific kind of attention. The shelf held equipment, sample containers, a photograph of two children, a small carved wooden figure that Vathael could not taxonomically categorize, and a jar. The jar was sealed with a mesh top. It contained water, a few dried leaves, and something moving at the bottom. Larvae. Mosquito larvae. The pale, thread-thin wriggling that Vathael recognized from the aquatic stage documentation in the taxonomic file. The enemy. The resistant strain. Here, in a jar, on the shelf next to a photograph of children, in the sleeping area of the woman who had dedicated 3 decades to destroying it. She was breeding them. On purpose. She had the larvae of the organism that killed 600,000 projected additional humans in the next 18 months in a jar next to her bed, and she reached over without looking and tapped the glass twice with one finger, the way Vathael had seen humans tap at transparent surfaces to get the attention of whatever was inside. And then she went back to counting the ones on her arm. Vathael's dorsal membrane went fully rigid. It held the cup of cold tea in its forelimbs and looked at the jar and counted the larvae moving in it and did not look at Okafor directly. Filed note. Preliminary observation complete. Human threat response categorization requires revision. Extent of revision, unknown. Requesting continued observation window. The larvae moved. The lamp burned. Outside, 400 breeding females per cubic meter flew through the warm dark, and inside, the woman who was supposed to be losing this war was sitting under a lamp counting them with a mechanical counter that clicked very softly in the quiet of the night. Vathael held the cup, studied the jar. The membrane stayed rigid for a long time. Ferreira was singing to the mosquitoes. He had been singing for approximately 9 minutes. Vathael had been timing it without intending to, a reflex from its biological observation training, the same reflex that had counted Okafor's bites and logged the larvae in the jar, and noted, before Dawn had fully finished arriving, that the field lab's eastern wall was covered in a map it had not been shown. The map was hand-drawn, not printed, not digital. Actual markings on paper, pinned directly to the wall, covered in annotations in 3 different colors of ink, and 2 different hands, and what appeared to be in one corner a small drawing of a mosquito that had been given a face and a frown. Below the map, in a crate with the canisters. They were white, cylindrical, about the height of L's second forelimb. 53 of them, each one labeled. Ferreira was loading them onto a wheeled transport, and he was singing a low, rhythmic song in a language Vathael's translation matrix identified as Portuguese, with occasional departures into what appeared to be improvised commentary addressed directly to the canisters. "Safe travels," he said, to canister 31. He patted the top of it, loaded it onto the transport, moved to 32. Vathael looked at Okafor. Okafor had the expression of someone watching a ritual they found both slightly absurd and genuinely correct. "Sterile insect technique," she said, before Vathael could ask. "Factory-reared males. Radiation sterilized. We release them into the breeding population. They outcompete the wild males for females. No viable offspring." She paused. "It works. Slowly. In high enough volumes. Repeatedly applied." Another pause. "Very slowly. Your mortality projections, I know what the projections say." She said it without heat, without defensiveness, as a simple acknowledgement that the data existed and had been read. "Come look at this." She led Vathael to the hand-drawn map. Up close, the annotations were dense. Coordinates, dates, percentages. The 3 ink colors corresponded to a key in the lower right corner. Red for active infestation, gold for suppressed zones, blue for contested margins. The frowning mosquito in the corner had a speech bubble. It said, in standard, "You're not going to like this." "The red is real," Okafor said. "The northern advance is real. The resistant strain is faster than we modeled, and we need to fix our models." She tapped the red zones with one finger. "But look at the gold." Vathael looked. The gold zones were not random. They were concentrated, overlapping, building on each other at the margins, the way a rising tide built pressure, except in reverse, the gold pushing inward against the red, slowly, in the way that glaciers moved, in the way that things moved when they had no intention of stopping and no particular hurry. We've been running coordinated SIT release in the Western Corridor for 4 years, Okafor said. The gold zones in the West are holding, expanding in some sectors. She traced a line. This is the frontier. This is where we are right now. The resistance strain has the North, yes. The North is ugly. But the North is also where we're releasing the most modified males this cycle. The resistance strain is outpacing your release capacity. Currently, yes. She pulled her hand back, looked at the map. VethAL, what's the Union's metric for campaign success? VethAL listed them from memory. Pathogen incidence reduction, vector population suppression, campaign timeline relative to mortality cost, projected endpoint, clean eradication or stable suppression as defined by timeline, Okafor said. What's the acceptable timeline? For a campaign of this scale and resource commitment, the Union's readiness assessments typically project how long do you think this should take? VethAL stopped. It was a different question. Okafor looked at it. Waiting. She had the quality, VethAL had begun to notice it, of someone who was comfortable with the amount of time a question took to answer. She did not fill silence. She let it sit. Given the resistant strain's emergence rate and the resource constraints on your modified male production capacity, VethAL said slowly, a conservative estimate would be, we've been at this for 100 years, Okafor said. We'll be at it for 100 more if we have to. Not angry, not defiant. The way a doctor states a dosing schedule. The way Ferreira had said safe travels to canister 31. A schedule. Outside, Ferreira was loading the last of the canisters. He had stopped singing and was doing something with the transport's release mechanism, checking it with the focus of someone who had done this enough times that the focus had become automatic rather than anxious. The canisters sat in their rows. 53 of them. Each one full of males that would fly out into the warm morning air and look for females and find them and mate with them and produce nothing. And the next week there would be 53 more, and the week after that, and the year after that, and the decade after that. And the VethAL watched Ferreira lift the empty test canister, shake it once to confirm it was clear, and set it on the stack of empties building against the lab's outer wall. The stack was tall. The empties were dented, scuffed, patched in places with the same adhesive tape that lived on Okafor's sleeve. These canisters have been filled and emptied and filled again many times. The sun was fully up. VethAL opened its comm channel. Commander Rethon. The report. I'm requesting a 72-hour extension on the preliminary filing. The silence from Rethon's end lasted 4 full seconds. His displeasure signature, when it came through the environmental trace on the comm, was sharp enough that VethAL's sensors registered it as a physical thing, like pressure. The data does not support an extension. I have observations that are not yet in the data, VethAL said. Another silence. Shorter this time. 72 hours, Rethon said. Then we file. The comm closed. Okafor was looking at VethAL with the expression from the photograph. VethAL did not explain. It turned back to the hand-drawn map, to the gold zones holding the line against the red, and it began very carefully to revise the set of questions it had come down here to ask. The new strain had reached the northern corridor overnight, and Okafor's laugh, when she saw the map, was the most frightening sound VethAL had recorded in 11 cycles of fieldwork. Not because it was loud. It was quiet, actually a single exhaled sound, almost inward, the kind of sound a person makes when they have been expecting a thing to arrive, and it has arrived, and they are deciding in real time whether to be vindicated or dismayed, and landing somewhere that was neither. VethAL's biochemical sensors caught the spike of stress hormones that accompanied it. Adrenaline equivalent. Cortisol equivalent. The human endocrine system responding to perceived threat at full register. The laugh was completely at odds with all of it. 3 provinces, Ferreira said from the map. He had a red marker in one hand, and he was not using it yet. Holding it. Overnight. Okafor was already at the data console. Her fingers moved across the input surface in a rapid, slightly arrhythmic way they moved when she was processing faster than the interface, and occasionally going back to fix what the speed had broken. Genetic drift on the resistance loci. They found another pathway. That's faster than I know. VethAL stood near the door. The eastern sky through the lab's small viewport was gray-orange, the sun not yet fully over the horizon. The map on the wall looked different with the new data on it. The red zones had shifted overnight, a visible jump, the kind of movement that in geological terms would represent an earthquake, and in campaign terms represented months of work invalidated. The gold zones had not moved. They held their lines. But the ratio had changed. Rethon came through the door. He did not look at Vethael. He moved to the center of the lab, all 6 limbs set in the wide, low posture that Savari used in formal confrontation. Not aggression, something more considered than aggression, the posture of someone who has made a decision and arrived to announce it. His dorsal membrane was fully rigid, fully pale. It had been that way since before he entered, which meant he had made the decision in the ship before descent, and the descent itself had been the announcement. "We've observed the overnight data," he said. He addressed Okafor. Vethael noted that this was unusual. Rethon did not typically address non-union species directly unless he was issuing a formal statement. The Galactic Union cannot maintain contact status with a species that demonstrates insufficient control over its own biosphere. Quarantine classification. How long has your species been spacefaring? Okafor said. Rethon stopped. She had not interrupted him. She had waited for a breath space, precisely the length of time that Savari formal speech left between clauses, and inserted the question into it. Vethael could not have said whether she had studied Savari speech patterns or whether it was accident. The effect was the same either way. 4,000 cycles, Rethon said after a pause. The pause itself was a concession. A Savari commander in formal posture was not supposed to pause for conversational questions. How many extinction-level pathogens did you manage before you made it to space? Okafor said. The silence that followed lasted longer than 4 seconds. Ferreira had stopped moving entirely, the red marker still uncapped in his hand, standing at the map with the particular stillness of someone who had learned that the best thing to do in certain moments was to become furniture. That, Rethon said, is not the relevant. Your species, Okafor said, reached space from a low-pathogen world. I've read the Union's xenobiological files. Your home system has the 4th lowest historical parasite burden in the catalog database. She was not looking at her console anymore. She was looking at Rethon with full attention, and her voice had not changed, still level, still the voice of someone presenting data, but something underneath it had shifted. Not anger. Harder than anger. We came from a world that spent 4 billion years trying to kill everything on it, including us. We're still here. The campaign is failing. The campaign is in progress. The mortality projections are real, she said. I wrote some of them. They are real, and they are terrible, and they're also not the end of the sentence. She turned back to her console. Your species cannot even defeat an insect. Rethon had said it. Not her. She was quoting him. The thing he was about to say, the conclusion every Union readiness metric led to. She had pulled it out of the air before he'd finished walking toward it. Not yet, she said. 2 words. No emphases. The same tone she had used to describe the sterile insect release timeline. The same tone she had used to list the gold zones on the map. A schedule. A simple acknowledgement that the endpoint existed and was going to be reached, and the only relevant question was the route. Vethael's dorsal membrane was not rigid. It had been monitoring its own stress responses since Rethon arrived. In a formal confrontation between a Union commander in full declaration posture and a planetary representative of a species under quarantine review, a junior xenobiologist's membrane should have been rigid with the social and professional pressure of the situation, if nothing else. It was not rigid. It was at baseline. It was warm. Vethael looked at Rethon's membrane. Fully pale. Every receptor flat. The maximum registered stress response. Vethael looked at its own forelimbs. The membrane lay along its back in relaxed folds. The way it lay when Vethael was working quietly on a problem it found interesting. Rethon turned to Vethael. The look lasted 3 seconds. 6 hours, he said. Then, the report files. He left. The door sealed behind him. Okafor was back at her console. Her fingers were moving again, fast and slightly arrhythmic. Ferreira uncapped the red marker and began updating the map with the overnight data, and the red bled further into the north, and the gold held its lines, and the morning light through the viewport got incrementally brighter in the slow way of equatorial mornings. 6 hours, Ferreira said, not to anyone in particular. Vethael crossed the lab and stood next to Okafor. It looked at the screen. The new overnight data was open in 3 windows: genetic drift mapping, spread velocity, projected cascade territory in the next 72 hours. The data was ugly. The most honest word in any language for data shaped like this was ugly. Okafor's fingers did not slow. Vethael did not know what was possible in 6 hours. It had no protocol for this moment. No union framework, no xenobiological category, no word in Savari for the specific state of following a person into a room, because the room is where the answer is, and you don't know what the answer is, and you're following them anyway. There was a word in Savari for correct surrender, another for calculated retreat, an entire grammatical structure built around the various forms of rational withdrawal from unwinnable positions. Vethael stood next to Okafor and looked at the data and waited to see what she was going to do with it. It stayed. That was all. It simply stayed. Okafor had a solution. She had it for 3 days. She'd been waiting for the data to be ugly enough that no one would argue about the ethics. A gene drive, Vethael said. A suppression drive. Okafor pulled the model onto the large display. Color-coded cascade maps, 4 generations deep, spreading across a simulated resistant strain population not like anything Vethael had a metaphor for. Like watching something unravel from the inside. It targets the resistance loci specifically. Heritable modification. It propagates through the wild population on its own once released. Cascades through 4 reproductive generations. At the end of generation 4, the resistance mutations are non-functional. She paused. The mosquitoes are still there. We're not trying to eradicate the species. We're removing the armor. You've had this for 3 days, Vethael said. I've had the design for 6 months. I've had the calibration data I needed for 3 days. She looked at the cascade maps without expression. I needed to know exactly how the new resistance pathway was structured. I needed the northern outbreak data to see it clearly. She paused again. The pause had the quality of something that had been decided before she started speaking. The drive couldn't be released without that calibration. A poorly calibrated suppression drive could create selection pressure for the next resistance mutation. We'd accelerate our own problem. Ferreira said from his station. She's been running the models since Tuesday. Since Tuesday, Vethael said. The northern outbreak hit Sunday night. He was not looking up from his console. She had the calibration run done by Tuesday morning. She's been running sensitivity analysis since then. Edge cases. Vethael looked at Okafor. Okafor was looking at the cascade maps. She had the expression of someone reading a document they had written and checking it for errors they already knew were not there. The overnight data, Vethael said slowly. The 3 provinces confirmed the resistance pathway structure. She finally looked away from the display. The drive is ready. The release vector is ready. I've been waiting for the model confidence interval to clear 97%. She picked up a tablet, checked something. It cleared at 4 this morning. You needed the outbreak to get worse. She didn't answer immediately. The answer was in the silence before she spoke. I needed the outbreak to give me the data I didn't have. Those aren't the same thing. She set the tablet down. I didn't cause this. The drive would have been less reliable without this data. I was not going to release a less reliable drive. Ferreira said quietly. She also cried about it Tuesday night. Okafor looked at him. Ferreira was looking at his console. His voice had been matter of fact, not an accusation, not comfort, a correction to the record, a thing that was true and therefore belonged in the room. Okafor looked back at the cascade maps. Yes, she said. I did. Vethael processed this. The human had the solution. She had the solution, and she waited because releasing it too early would create worse problems, and she knew the waiting had a cost, and she paid the cost and cried about it, and then came back to work in the morning with her calibration interval at 97%. Vethael searched its 11 cycles of field experience for a species that had made that calculation and found no one. The Savari had a word for rational acceptance of necessary loss. Other species had equivalents. They were all fundamentally about surrender to correct outcomes. This was different. This was endurance of necessary cost in service of correct outcomes. This was not surrender. This was the opposite of surrender, worn in a shape that only looked like patience. The drive went out at 8 in the morning. Vethael watched from the lab as Okafor and Ferreira coordinated the release with field teams across 4 continents. A network of humans in field labs and mobile units and government coordination centers who had been primed for this moment, who had the release vectors ready, who had been waiting for Okafor's signal. The coordination was not beautiful in the way that Savari coordination was beautiful. It was messy, overlapping, the humans talking over each other in 3 languages and 2 dialects, and occasionally swearing in ways Vethael's translation matrix flagged as non-literal. But it was thorough. Rethon arrived at 3 hours, 40 minutes. His membrane was still pale, but no longer at maximum. He stood in the doorway of the lab and watched the cascade models running on the main display. 4 generations of simulated mosquito populations, the resistance loci going gray as the drive propagated, the mortality projections bending slowly downward, and he was quiet for a long time. The color changes in his membrane ran through 3 sequences Vethael did not have a log entry for. Rapid, complex, not matching any of the standard Savari stress response categories. Vethael watched them and tried to construct an interpretation and found the categories insufficient. Rethon left without filing a report. The door sealed. Vethael stood in the middle of the lab with Okafor on one side and Ferreira on the other, and the cascade models running on the display, and did not move for a long time. Ferreira made a sound. Several sounds in sequence, rising. Then he shouted something in Portuguese that Vethael's matrix translated as a combination of an exclamation of religious significance and an agricultural metaphor, and he grabbed Okafor by the shoulders, and she laughed, the real one, not the quiet, frightening one from the morning, loud and warm and without any of the stress hormone undertone, just laughter that sounded like something releasing. Then she went to the shelf with the sample containers, the photograph, the carved figure, and the jar. She reached past the jar without looking at it, past the larvae still moving in their water, the enemy she kept on purpose, the thing she was not trying to destroy, but to understand and outmaneuver and ultimately render harmless. And she pulled out a bottle from behind it. The bottle contained a liquid that Vethael's sensors identified as ethanol in a complex organic solution. 40% concentration. The remaining 60% contained compounds Vethael had cataloged previously under humans consume solvents recreationally, and the chemistry of Earth's celebratory biochemistry, and simply unclear, revisit. She set 2 glasses on the table. Poured. Looked at Vethael. Poured a third. Set in front of Vethael. The glass was small. The liquid in it was amber. And the lamplight, Okafor had turned on the small warm lamp, the one that attracted mosquitoes, out of what Vethael had begun to recognize as a specific kind of ritual attachment to it, caught the amber and made it glow at the edges. Vethael looked at the glass, looked at the liquid, looked at Okafor. She was not explaining. She was not asking. She was simply making the glass available, in the same way Ferreira had made the tea available on the first day, in the same way humans, apparently, made everything available, without transaction, without precondition, without any apparent interest in whether the offering was logical or whether the recipient was biologically compatible or whether it made sense given the context of what they were and where they had all come from and how improbable this moment was. Vethael picked up the glass. It did not drink it, not immediately. It held it the way it had held the tea. The glass was warm from being near the lamp. The amber liquid was still. Outside, in the dark, 400 breeding females per cubic meter were flying through the warm night, and some of them were already carrying a modification they did not know about that would move through their children and their children's children until the armor fell away, and the war became, quietly and without ceremony, something closer to manageable. Not won, not over, managed, suppressed, turned from catastrophe toward the long, slow work of a species that had been paying this cost for so long that the payment had become simply a fact of existing. The way gravity was a fact, the way the distance between stars was a fact, something you accounted for and worked around and did not, under any circumstances, mistake for the end. Ferreira raised his glass. Okafor raised hers. Vethael looked at both of them, and at the cascade models still running on the display, and at the jar on the shelf with the larvae moving in it, and at the handwritten map on the wall with its gold zones holding their lines. It raised the glass. The ethanol hit Vethael's biochemical sensors like a detonation. 7 processing layers simultaneously flagged solvent hazard. The warmth that followed was, by every metric Vethael's training had given it, indistinguishable from mild systemic damage. It was not unpleasant. Vethael stood in the warm chaos of the lab, smelling of ethanol and capsaicin and controlled decay and the complex biochemistry of 2 humans celebrating the specific kind of victory that was not victory, but continuation, not triumph, but the refusal to stop, and held the glass, and did not look for a category. Later, on the ship, Vethael wrote the report. Not the quarantine one. The quarantine documentation had been in a holding folder for 72 hours, and Vethael deleted it without reading it again. The new document was filed under Category Revision Proposal, routed to the Union Council's Xenobiological Standards Committee, and marked in the Savari administrative system, with the flag that indicated a submission by a field observer who had witnessed something the existing frameworks were not built to hold. The report was long. It contained the genetic drive data, the cascade models, the campaign history, the gold zones on the hand-drawn map, and a methodological argument that the Union's readiness metrics were calibrated for species who had solved their existential challenges before making contact, and therefore systematically excluded species who were in the process of solving them. The last line of the report read, "This species does not lose slowly. It wins on a time scale we do not yet have instruments to measure." Vethael read it back, considered revising it, did not, filed. The ship moved away from Earth's gravity well in the slow, ceremonial arc that Union vessels used when departing inhabited systems. Through the observation viewport, the planet turned blue and green and brown, the West African corridor, a small visible thing from this distance, a texture on the surface, a color that from here gave no indication of what was happening inside it. The gold zones were invisible. The red zones were invisible. The cascade models were invisible. Everything was invisible from space except the fact of the planet itself, existing, turning, held in place by the same forces that held all things in place. Vethael stood at the viewport for a long time. It was thinking about the jar, the larvae in it, the way Okafor had tapped the glass twice with one finger and gone back to work, the way the act of keeping your enemy alive to understand it was, in some framework Vethael was still constructing, the most effective thing she could have done. Not hatred, not fear, study, the patient, costly, century-spanning commitment to knowing the thing that was trying to kill you well enough that eventually you knew it better than it knew itself. There was no Savari word for that. There was no word in any language Vethael spoke for that. There might need to be. The interior of a sleek galactic Union observation vessel, the main research deck lit by cool blue-white illumination from curved bioluminescent panels. A tall, 6-limbed alien xenobiologist, the Savari Vethael, with pale silver-gray skin, a translucent dorsal membrane running from skull to mid-spine, narrow, elongated head, and for chest-mounted biochemical sensing slits, stands at a large holographic display reviewing cascading columns of data. The alien's posture is contemplative, its forelimbs resting lightly on the console edge. The data columns glow amber and red, showing mortality curves and spread vectors. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The observation deck's holographic display shifts to show a taxonomic profile of Aedes aegypti, a mosquito rendered in clinical scientific detail, enlarged many times, wings spread, anatomy labeled. The Savari xenobiologist fell, tall, 6-limbed, silver-gray, with a translucent dorsal spine membrane, stares at the display with its sensing slits flared open, reading the creature's mass and lifespan data. The contrast between the immense display and the tiny insect rendered on it is stark. Cold blue lighting, cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. A wide holographic map of Earth fills the observation deck, green and brown continents traced with silver river lines. The West African corridor is highlighted, red zones spreading across 4 continents in overlapping rings. The Savari Vithil, 6-limbed, pale silver-gray, translucent dorsal membrane, stands before the globe, 4 limbs clasped, membrane barely visible along its back. Through the lower viewport below, the real planet turns slowly. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. A Savari commander, Rethon, the same species as Vethel, but older, larger, his dorsal membrane rigidly extended and bleached pale white with stress. All 6 limbs in a wide formal stance stand in the doorway of the observation deck. Behind him, the corridor glows with Union ship amber lighting. He is addressing Vethel, whose posture remains carefully neutral. The contrast between the commander's rigid pale membrane and Vethel's relaxed one is visible. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Drone footage rendered as a holographic window. A West African agricultural landscape. Late afternoon light, amber fields, palm trees, the edge of a river. A converted cargo hauler field laboratory sits on the bank. Old, visibly patched in multiple places, hull plating of mismatched colors. A stocky Nigerian-British woman in her early 50s, Dr. Amara Okafor, with close-cropped gray hair and a worn long-sleeved field shirt, walks deliberately into a cloud of mosquitoes. She is calm, unhurried. Her left sleeve has adhesive tape on the elbow. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Closed drone feed view. Dr. Amara Okafor, stocky, gray-haired, late 50s, long-sleeve field clothes with a taped elbow tier, extends her bare left forearm deliberately toward the air. A mosquito lands on her skin. She watches it feed. Her expression is focused, clinical, entirely without alarm. Behind her, a younger man, Ferreira, 28, lean and dark-haired, holds a sample device. Late afternoon, equatorial light. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Extreme close-up rendered through a holographic drone feed display. A human forearm with a fresh mosquito bite, a small red mark against brown skin. A thumb presses against it, leaving a small smear of blood. The hand belongs to Okafor. She holds her palm up, examining the smear. Her expression is diagnostic, satisfied. The drone feed frame shows the image suspended in the blue light of the observation deck. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The observation deck again, Vethel alone, staring a frozen frame of the drone feed on the holographic display. The smear of blood on Okafor's palm, caught in the late afternoon light. The Savari's 6 limbs are still, dorsal membrane rigid in the first stages of stress pale. The rest of the observation deck is orderly, dark, the planet visible slowly turning through the lower viewport. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The interior of the converted cargo hauler field lab, warm, cluttered, functional. Metal shelving units line the walls with sample containers, equipment cases, and a small personal photograph. A portable can burner with a pot on it. The smell of the space is suggested by the layered visual detail. Ethanol containers, dried chili strings, sealed biological sample jars. Dr. Okafor is visible through a partition at the rear. The lab's patchwork construction is evident. Different hull panel ages, cable management added in stages. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The field lab doorway. Vethel, the tall, 6-limbed Savari xenobiologist, silver gray, translucent dorsal membrane, biochemical sensing slits along its thorax, stands at the threshold, having just entered. The height difference between the alien and the human-scale doorframe is visible. Ferreira, 28, lean, cheerful expression, stands inside holding out a metal cup of hot tea toward the alien. His posture is open, offering, entirely unintimidated. Warm lamplight from inside contrasts with the equatorial morning light outside. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Inside the field lab, Ferreira extends a metal cup of hot dark tea toward Vithel, who stands at full height. Nearly 2 meters, 6-limbed, silver gray, holding its forelimbs slightly forward in a gesture of uncertain acceptance. Ferreira is smiling with the automatic ease of someone who offers tea to everyone regardless of species. The lab interior is visible behind them. Cluttered shelving, medical equipment, a camp stove, warm orange lamp. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Dr. Okafor emerges from behind a partition inside the field lab, pulling down the sleeve of her field shirt, the adhesive tape on the left elbow freshly replaced. She is looking at Vethael with calm, evaluating attention, the expression of someone deciding the most efficient way to proceed. The Savari stands in the middle of the lab, holding a cup. Ferreira is at the camp stove in the background. Warm mixed lighting. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Okafor sits backward on a chair, forearms crossed on the chair back, posture compact and coiled. She holds a tablet displaying a campaign map, red spread zones, small gold suppression pockets. She is showing it to Vethel, who stand at the table, 6 limbs positioned to lean slightly forward in the alien equivalent of close attention. The lab around them is lived in and functional. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Wide shot of the holographic campaign map spread across the field lab's central table between Okafor and Vithael. The map shows 4 continents, red infestation zones dominant in the north and east, small clusters of gold suppression zones in the west. Okafor points to the gold zones with one finger. Vethael's sensing slits are wide open. The map's colors are vivid against the lab's warm ambient light. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close view of the campaign map's gold zones. Irregular patches of pale gold color spreading in overlapping gradients against red, located in the western continental corridor. Okafor's hand traces a marginal line between the colors. The map's surface shows coordinate annotations, date stamps, percentage values in small, precise handwriting. Vethael's forelimb is barely visible at the frame edge, its sensing slits flaring at the visual data. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The field lab at night. A small warm orange lamp burns on the work desk, the only light source. Dr. Okafor sits at the desk in its glow, a tally counter in her right hand, a small notebook open beside her. Her left arm rests on the desk surface, exposed below the sleeve. Several mosquitoes are visible as tiny dark shapes near the lamp. One is on her forearm. Her expression is calm, focused, her lips moving slightly as she counts. Behind her, sample containers on the shelf. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. View from across the dark field lab. Okafor is a warm silhouette at the lit work desk, the orange lamp casting a small circle of light. Vethael stands against the far wall, almost in shadow, 6 limbs arranged in the stillness of an observer who has been watching for a long time. The Savari's dorsal membrane is faintly visible along its back, slightly rigid. The contrast between the alien's still, dark form and Okafor's warm, busy figure is stark. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close up on the field lab shelf. A glass jar, sealed with fine mesh, holding water with a few dried leaves. At the bottom, mosquito larvae, pale, thread-thin, wriggling. The jar sits next to a small framed photograph of 2 children and a carved wooden figurine. The shelf is lit by the ambient orange lamplight from below. The jar is ordinary. The larvae inside it are anything but. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vethael stands rigid before the shelf, holding the larval jar. The Savari's dorsal membrane has gone pale and stiff along its full length, maximum stress response, the membrane visibly bleached white against its normally silver-gray skin. All 6 limbs are locked. The alien stares at the jar. The larvae move. The photograph of the children is visible beside it. Warm amber lamplight. Cinematic sci-fi illustration. Dramatic lighting. Deep space setting. Extreme close-up through the glass of the larval jar. Mosquito larvae suspended in cloudy water, their bodies pale and segmented, visible in the warm lamplight. Behind the glass, out of focus, the field lab interior continues. Okafor's moving silhouette at the work desk. The larvae are alive, moving. The enemy, kept alive, on purpose, in a jar the size of a fist. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The field lab's exterior at dawn. The converted cargo hauler parked on the edge of a West African agricultural plain. The sky is gray-orange, the sun not yet fully risen. The lab's patchwork hull is visible, different panel ages, repair patches, a long antenna extending from the roof. Ferreira is outside by a wheeled transport, checking its release mechanism, moving with the focused ease of long practice. Behind him, white cylindrical canisters are stacked in rows. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Interior of the field lab, morning light beginning through the small viewport. Ferreira lifts one of the white cylindrical SI-to-release canisters from a crate, pats the top of it with one hand, and sets it carefully on the wheeled transport. His expression is genuine, fond, slightly ridiculous. A man saying farewell to a canister of sterile mosquitoes. Behind him, 49 more canisters wait in their row. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close up on a single white SI-to-release canister in Ferreira's hands. The canister is cylindrical, about half a meter tall, labeled in small black text. Ferreira's hands hold it with the specific care of something often handled and valued. His thumbs are visible, the gesture of habitual gentleness. The canister's surface is scuffed at the base. It has been used before. Behind his hands, the field lab interior is a warm blur. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The hand-drawn campaign map covering the eastern wall of the field lab in full view. A large sheet of paper pinned directly to the wall, dense with annotations in red, gold, and blue ink. 2 distinct handwriting styles are visible. Coordinate grids, date stamps, percentage labels. In one corner, a small sketched mosquito with an exaggerated frown. Below it, a speech bubble in English. The map is the record of a years-long war. Okafor stands before it with her arms at her sides. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close up on the gold zone section of the hand-drawn wall map. Overlapping pale gold shadings in the western corridor, their borders marked in blue ink with a press against the red zones. Okafor's finger traces the front line between colors. The handwriting in the annotations is small and precise. Behind her finger, coordinates and percentages in her own hand. Vethal's 6-limbed form is partially visible beside her, dorsal membrane warming from white towards silver-gray. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Wide shot outside the field lab. Ferreira activates the wheeled transport, and the first canister releases its load, a visible diffuse cloud of tiny forms lifting into the morning air, catching the low equatorial sunlight in a brief shimmer. Ferreira stands beside the transport with both arms slightly out, watching the cloud disperse. His posture is that of someone releasing something important. Okafor and Vethal watch from the lab doorway behind him. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Exterior shot from ground level. Tens of millions of sterile mosquitoes rising from the open canisters in a translucent cloud, dispersing into the West African morning sky above the agricultural plain. The cloud catches the low golden light before thinning into invisibility. Empty white canisters are stacked against the lab's outer hull beside the transport. The sky above is pale orange and gray. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close up on a stack of empty SIT canisters against the lab's outer hull. A dozen of them, scuffed, dented at the bases, patched in places with tape that matches the tape on Okafor's sleeve. The same brand, the same angle of application. Each one has been filled and emptied multiple times. The stack has a weathered, purposeful quality. Ferreira sets another empty canister on top. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Inside the lab, Okafor and Vithael stand side by side before the hand-drawn wall map. Okafor's posture is direct, explaining. Vithael's six-limbed form is turned toward her, all sensing slits open wide. The Savari's dorsal membrane has shifted to a mid-tone, no longer fully white, not fully relaxed, processing. The map between them shows gold holding against red. Morning light through the viewport. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Medium shot of Okafor's face and upper body in the lab. Morning light. She is speaking directly, clearly, without dramatics. Her eyes carry the quality of someone who has thought about this particular set of facts for a long time and has arrived at a stable place with them. She is not angry, not rallying, not performing. She is simply stating a schedule. The campaign map is visible behind her right shoulder, its gold zones lit by the morning light coming through the viewport. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close up on a stack of empty SIT canisters viewed from a different angle. The dents and scrapes and tape patches visible as individual records of previous deployments. Ferreira's hands are in the frame, setting the last canister in place. The stack is tall. The story of all those previous campaigns is visible in the wear of the metal. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Vithael alone in the field lab, standing before the hand-drawn map, the morning light behind it through the viewport. The Savari's six limbs are still. Its dorsal membrane has returned to near baseline, not quite relaxed, thinking warm. The alien is looking at the map's gold zones, at the lines where gold presses against red, at 100 years of work made visible in colored ink on paper. The lab is quiet around it. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Interior of the Galactic Union ship's communication room. Vithael stands at a comm console, its posture careful and deliberate. The console displays the ship's communication channel, Rethon's identifier highlighted. Vithael's six limbs are positioned in the formal arrangement for a formal request to a superior. Its dorsal membrane is at baseline, not stress decided. The comm room's cool blue lighting surrounds it. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The field lab pre-dawn, dark except for equipment indicator lights. Vithael stands near the eastern wall, the hand-drawn map lit only by the glow of the equipment behind it. The Savari is still, observing the sleeping form of the lab, the jars on the shelf, the stacked canisters by the door. Its sensing slits are open, reading the night air of the lab. Ethanol, capsaicin, control decay, and the faint biological signatures of the humans who live here. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The field lab interior at gray pre-dawn. The overnight data map update is visible on the main display, new red spreading across the northern corridor, 3 new provinces shaded. Okafor stands before the display. Her expression is the quiet, inward laugh, the frightening one, the one that sounds like acceptance and decision happening simultaneously. Ferreira is behind her at the wall map, red marker in his uncapped hand. Vithael is near the door. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close up on the campaign, display showing overnight spread data. 3 new provinces highlighted in red in the northern corridor. The spread arrows moving faster than the model projections shown in ghost overlay beside them. The genetic drift annotations beside the new zones are in a different color, indicating a new resistance pathway. Okafor's reflection is visible in the display surface, watching the numbers. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Okafor at the data console, fingers moving across the input surface. Her hands move fast and slightly arrhythmic, the speed of someone thinking faster than their interface. Behind her, the mortality projection display is visible, the curves still bent upward. Her face is lit blue-white by the console. She is not panicking. She is working. Vethael watches from across the lab, its sensing slits tracking her biochemical output. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The field lab doorway. Rethon, a Savari commander, the same species as Vethel, but larger, older, his dorsal membrane rigidly extended and bleached fully white, all 6 limbs wide in formal declaration posture, stand at the center of the lab entrance. He fills the frame. His pale membrane is fully extended, catching the lab's warm light against its white surface. Behind him, the exterior morning light. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Interior of the field lab. Rethon in full formal Savari declaration posture, 6 limbs wide, dorsal membrane bleached white and rigid, faces Dr. Okafor, who sits on the edge of her desk. She is looking up at him with the expression from the biographical photograph. She is not standing. She is not performing submission. She is simply waiting for him to finish. The lab interior is warm and cluttered around the formal alien. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Medium close-up on Dr. Okafor's face during the confrontation with Rethon. She is looking at the Savari commander with full, calm attention. Her expression carries no fear, no deference, no anger. She is asking him a question. Her gray, close-cropped hair and worn field clothes are sharply ordinary against the formal alien behind her. The lab is lit in warm amber behind her, the map on the wall visible over her left shoulder. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up on Rethon's fully extended, fully pale dorsal membrane, lit by the lab's warm light. The translucent fan of skin is stretched rigid, its pale white color indicating maximum Savari stress response. The membrane's structure, delicate capillary lines visible through the translucent surface, is bleached of all color. It is the physical display of a species at the edge of what it can process. The lab's warm amber light makes the white look clinical. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. 3-shot inside the field lab. Okafor in the center, Rethon's large formal Savari form on her right, Vethel on her left. Rethon is at full declaration posture, membrane white. Okafor is calm, direct. Vethel is still, its own dorsal membrane visibly at baseline relaxation. The contrast between the 2 Savari membranes visible in the same frame, one white and rigid, one silver-gray and warm. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up on Vethel's dorsal membrane from behind. The translucent membrane runs from the back of the skull to the mid-spine, lying in soft, relaxed folds, its color a healthy silver-gray. The membrane catches the warm lab light. Beside it, out of focus, Rethon's white rigid membrane is visible. The difference between the two is the story. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The field lab doorway from outside. Rethon, large, 6-limbed, membrane still pale, exits through the door into the morning light. His posture has shifted from formal declaration to something between retreat and withdrawal. The warm lab light frames the door behind him. Inside, Okafor is already back at her console. Vethel stands at the threshold, watching the commander leave. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Interior of the field lab. Vethel has crossed to stand beside Okafor at her data console. The Savari's 6 limbs are arranged in the close attention posture, its sensing slits wide open, reading the data on her screen. Okafor continues to work, not pausing for the alien's presence, treating it as simply there and useful. The screen between them shows genetic drift maps and cascade projections. 6 hours remain on the timer in the corner. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up on Okafor's hands moving across the data console input surface. Fast, arrhythmic, precise. The screen in front of her shows overlapping analysis windows. Genetic drift mapping, resistance loci visualization, spread velocity calculations. The timestamp in the corner reads pre-dawn. Her fingers have the wear of decades of fieldwork. Vethael's forelimb is at the frame edge, sensing slits visible. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The field lab at 4 a.m., lit only by equipment glow and Okafor's work screen. Okafor is at the console, the only person awake. The lab is quiet around her. Ferreira's rolled sleeping mat in one corner, the larval jar on the shelf, the hand-drawn map on the wall. The screen before her shows a confidence interval calculation, the number climbing toward a threshold. Her expression is the one of someone checking a thing they already know. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up on the confidence interval display. A single numerical readout on Okafor's screen showing 97.1%, highlighted green, with a timestamp of 4:03. Beside it, the gene drive cascade model waits in standby mode. The readout is simple, clean, decisive. Okafor's reflection in the screen shows her reading it with the expression of a door opening. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Okafor standing before the large campaign display showing the gene drive cascade model. For simulated generations of mosquito populations rendered as expanding color maps, resistance loci coloring going gray in sequence as the suppression drive propagates through the simulated population. The display is large, filling the eastern wall of the lab. She stands before it with her arms at her sides, reading it. The model is running. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up on the gene drive cascade visualization. A circular population map with color-coded resistance loci, showing Generation 1 with most loci active in red-orange, Generation 2 with loci beginning to gray, the cascade visible as a slow tide moving inward. The visualization is elegant, technical, precise. The colors shift in real time as the simulation runs. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Ferreira at his station in the field lab, headset on, speaking rapidly into a coordination channel, his voice energetic and focused. Multiple windows on his screen show field teams across 4 continents, each one marked ready. His desk is organized with the particular efficiency of someone doing this for the 100th time. The pre-dawn lab light turns his face blue-white. Behind him, Okafor coordinates at the main display. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Wide view of the field lab during the drive release coordination. Okafor at the central display. Ferreira at his station. Vethael standing at the room's edge, all lit by screens showing a global coordination network. The display shows Earth's continents, green release confirmation markers lighting up one by one across the map. The room buzzes with communication in 3 languages. The lamp is on. The larval jar on the shelf is in the background. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The global coordination network displayed on the field lab's main screen. A world map with field team locations marked, color-coded release confirmation signals appearing across the globe in sequence. West to east, a chain of green lights activating. The map is layered over the campaign data, gold zones and red zones still visible beneath. The coordinated release looks like a net being cast. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Exterior view of field teams across the West African corridor. 3 separate locations shown in split-screen drone feeds on the lab's secondary display, each releasing the suppression drive vector into infestation zones. Humans in field gear working in parallel, coordinated, each one performing the same action in different landscapes. River delta, agricultural plain, edge of a city. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Rethon entering the field lab doorway at 3 hours 40 minutes. He is no longer in full declaration posture. His 6 limbs are at a looser arrangement. His dorsal membrane has shifted from fully white to a mottled transitional state, partially rigid, partially relaxing, the color moving. His expression, in Savari terms, is the absence of the certainty he arrived with. The warm lab light receives him. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up on Rethon's dorsal membrane in transition. The translucent surface shows visible color change in progress. Patches of its natural silver gray returning against areas still white pale, the capillary lines within the membrane becoming visible again as blood flow returns. The membrane is processing something it cannot yet categorize. It is a beautiful, strange, involuntary display. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Rethon before the main display in the field lab. Alone, except for Vethael at the edge of the room. He stares at the gene drive cascade model running its generations. Resistance loci going gray, mortality projections bending downward, the model showing suppression establishing its cell generation by generation. His membrane cycles through 3 undocumented color states. His posture has changed. He is watching something his frameworks did not predict. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The field lab's main display showing the cascade model at generation 3. Most resistance loci now grayed out across the simulated population, the suppression drive well established. The mortality projection curve on the secondary display has begun to bend. The bend is small, early but visible. Okafor stands before it. She is not celebrating yet. She is reading the numbers. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The field lab doorway from inside. Rethon stands in the frame, his back to the viewer, about to leave. His membrane has settled into an intermediate state, not fully relaxed, not fully stressed. He has filed nothing. The morning light behind him is full daylight now. The lab interior behind his retreating form shows Okafor at her console, Ferreira at a station. The quarantine report has not been filed. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Ferreira mid-celebration. He is standing, arms raised, mouth open in a shout, a sound in Portuguese that the room seems too small to contain. His face is lit with the specific expression of relief that only arrives after a very long wait. Behind him, the campaign display shows green confirmation spreading across the map. His headset is still on, one ear. The lamp is on. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Okafor laughing, the real laugh, the warm one, not the quiet, frightening one. Her head is back slightly, her whole face involved, the stress hormone signature of the last 72 hours visibly releasing. Ferreira's hands are on her shoulders. The lab around them is the same warm, cluttered space it has always been. Through the viewport behind her, the equatorial morning is full and bright. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Okafor at the shelf, reaching past the larval jar without looking at it, her hand going for the bottle behind it. The jar is in the foreground. Larvae still moving, the resistant strain contained and studied and now partially answered but still alive, still there. Okafor's hand bypasses it easily. Naturally, the gesture of someone who has long made peace with what the jar represents. The amber bottle is behind her hand, just visible. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. 3 glasses on the field lab table, 2 filled with amber liquid, 1 being filled from the bottle Okafor holds. The small warm lamp lights the table from the side, catching the amber in the glasses so they glow at the edges. The bottle is old, the label worn. This is a ritual. The 3rd glass, Vethael's, is being poured with the same quantity as the other 2, no less. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Medium shot of Dr. Okafor setting the 3rd glass in front of Vethael. She is not making a ceremony of it. She is simply making the glass available. The same posture as Ferreira offering tea, the same transaction-free offering, the same absence of conditions. The glass is on the table. Vethael can take it or not. She is already turning back to check the display. The amber liquid glows in the lamp's light. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up on Vethael's forelimb reaching for the glass. 6 fingers wrapping around the small glass with careful precision. The silver-gray alien skin against the warm amber of the liquid. The glass is almost too small for the alien's hand. The dorsal membrane along Vethael's back is fully relaxed, silver gray, warm. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. 3-shot at the field lab table. Ferreira, Okafor, and Vethael each holding a glass. Ferreira's glass raised, Okafor's rising, the Savari's 6-limbed form at the table's edge, its glass held in both forelimbs at the height that matches the human gesture. The lamp's amber light catches all 3 glasses at once. No one is making a speech. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up on Vethael's face in the moment after the first taste. The Savari's 7 biochemical sensing slits along its thorax are all wide open simultaneously, a stress-flagged involuntary response to the ethanol. Its dorsal membrane flickers through several rapid color shifts. Its expression, in alien terms, is completely unreadable, but it is holding the glass. It has not put the glass down. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The field lab at evening. Okafor, Ferreira, and Vethael in the warm amber lamplight, the lab around them unchanged, the hand-drawn map on the wall, the larval jar on the shelf, the empty SIT canisters near the door, the sample containers in their rows. The Cascade model still runs on the secondary display, Generation 4 in progress. The moment is quiet. The lamp attracts 2 mosquitoes, circling in the warm light. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up on the larval jar on the shelf in the lamplight, the larvae still visible and moving. The photograph of the 2 children is beside it. The wooden carved figure. The warm bottle with 1 glass worth of amber liquid still inside it. The shelf is the room in miniature. The enemy studied, the children protected, the human things that serve no tactical function but define the person who keeps them. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The field lab's hand-drawn wall map in the amber lamplight. The gold zones lit warmly. The gold presses against the red. In the eastern corridor, new red still shows, the northern outbreak unchanged. But the Cascade model's data stamps are beginning to appear along those edges too, small blue annotations indicating suppression drive propagation confirmed. The map is not done. It will never be all gold, but the gold is holding. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Galactic Union observation ship interior. The research deck, blue-white lighting. Vethael, alone, at a console. A document is open on the display. The folder for the quarantine report is visible in a secondary window. Empty, the files deleted. The new document in the primary window has a header visible at the top. Category revision proposal. The alien's 6 limbs are in the composed arrangement of writing. Its membrane is baseline relaxed. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close-up on the category revision proposal document on Vethael's screen. The text is in Savari administrative script, dense and precise, but the last line is visible in standard as a translation note. 7 words, occupying their own line, separated from the paragraph above by white space. The cursor is at the end of the line. No more text follows. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Galactic Union ship's observation deck. Vethael, standing at the lower viewport as the ship moves away from Earth. The planet is visible through the viewport, blue, green, brown, cloud-streaked. The Terminator line marking the boundary between day and night across the West African continent. The planet is turning. From this distance, nothing of the campaign is visible. Everything is invisible except the fact of the world, alive, continuing. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Wide shot through the observation viewport. Earth growing smaller as the Union ship ascends, the planet's curvature visible, the sun behind it casting the edge of the Terminator in gold. The West African corridor, the field lab, the hand-drawn map, the larval jar, Okafor or desk, the empty canisters stacking against the wall, is somewhere on that surface too small to see. The planet is ordinary from here. The ship moves away. Vethael's reflection is faint in the viewport glass. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close up on Vethal's reflection in the observation viewport glass, the planet visible behind it through the transparency. The Savari's face elongated, silver gray, the biochemical sensing slits quiet, the dorsal membrane at baseline. It is looking at the planet. Its expression, for the first time in the story, is not processing new data. It has landed somewhere. The reflection and the planet occupy the same frame, superimposed. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Final image. The observation deck, empty except for Vethel. The holographic display still shows Earth, the gold and red campaign map still running in a secondary window. Vethal stands with its back to the viewer, 6 limbs loose, membrane silver gray, looking at the planet. On the console behind it, the category revision proposal document is open, the last line visible. The recycled cold air of the ship fills the space. The planet turns. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.